Hi there, Norah.
Hi, how are you, David?
I'm very well, thank you. Hello everyone. To introduce our interview today, this is GCS Connect Leaders Series with Norah Cullen from Salesforce. She's in Dublin, which is nice. I wish I could be in Dublin, it'd be lovely. So just to introduce everything, GCS is a technology recruitment agency. We're based in Europe and the US, and increasingly in other parts of the world as well, Latin America and Australia. We're doing business with companies there at the moment. GCS Connect is our online community where we're bringing together expert talent and innovative companies like Salesforce. And the Leader Series is where we reach out to senior people from a wide variety of different types of roles and projects to understand a little bit more about their experiences in the industry, and obviously their experiences of the last 12 months, which has been a very strange 12 months for everyone. So we have Norah with us today. She is a Senior Solutions Engineering Manager with Salesforce, 7.5 years with Salesforce, and previously, and I think we'll find out more about this, in politics and photography. So it kind of, that's from the fire to the frying pan, isn't it? Politics.
Absolutely.
It's great to have her on board. She has spoken before on one of our diversity seminars in Dublin, and we were so impressed. We thought we'd get her on for a one-on-one interview. So Norah, that's my intro, but I'm sure you can kind of tell us a little bit more about yourself. Do you want to just tell us about your role, what you do within Salesforce, and how that kind of links into the whole organization?
Absolutely. So, as you mentioned, I started in Salesforce 7.5 years ago, and I think, like many of your listeners, was completely confused at what is a solution engineer, or as we called us, sales engineering at the time.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, and I've learned, thankfully, I've learned since then, as you would hope, that solution engineering is essentially the pre-sales evaluation, the technical evaluation of Salesforce. So what we do is we support our sales teams and their prospects and customers to understand what can Salesforce do for them and for their companies. We get to do what I call the fun bit. So we don't
Sure.
do the prospecting part of sales. We just get to speak to people and understand what their challenges are, show them, all the fun and all the great things that they can achieve, and then leave the next bit to my sales colleagues. But we're very much invested in the entire evaluation process, and I have to say I have not been tempted to move away from it. I really do love working here, despite not coming from a technical background myself.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's, in some ways it's similar to technology recruitment, isn't it? You're talking all day, every day as a kind of go-between between different technological people, but putting it more in a kind of functional requirements basis as opposed to code and, deliverables.
Absolutely. And I mean, you're spot on. I think what we're learning more so this year than ever before is that technology is not about, green screens and how does one thing connect to another. It's about people.
Yeah.
It's created by people for people. And ultimately what we're trying to understand is how can we make it work harder for people?
Yeah, and I really see that. And I think you just mentioned the last year and how the changes have happened, and we've worked in different ways, and obviously Salesforce has really thrived within this environment as a SaaS software, hasn't it? It's been a good year for Salesforce. If you look at share price and the Slack takeover, it's been very good. But I think that's primarily because it's helping people to communicate, collaborate, and work together, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I mean, I think it would be remiss of us to say that, we're super excited about the growth that we've had this year, because primarily we've been consciously avoiding that sort of focus and really
Yeah.
focusing on, I think, as our CEO says, business is a platform for change and to help people.
Yeah.
And that's really what we focused on. So I work primarily with small and medium businesses. I've worked with
Yeah.
businesses of all sizes across Salesforce, but my passion is really within small business. And as you all know, I mean, this has been an incredibly challenging year. So the focus that we took and that I encourage my team to take is not to push anything on anybody. Now is a moment to to just take people by the virtual hand and just say, look,
Mm.
how can we help you? How can we be innovative and change how we work together? We're not looking to sell you anything, despite the name
Yeah,
Salesforce.
yeah,
We are looking
yeah,
to help you.
yeah. Help you sell, I guess that's the whole idea, isn't it?
Exactly.
So,
And more than that, I always say Salesforce is
yeah,
it's such a terrible name in some sense, but because we do so much more than that. The things I get excited about are the platform and what
yeah.
the normal person in every company can do
Mm.
to stay connected, really.
Yeah. And so when you've been going into businesses, in the last 12 months, and obviously you're a leader yourself, so you've seen certain challenges, what have been the key challenges that you've seen as a leader and that leaders have been coming to you with, like tearing their hair out, what's happening?
Yeah, and it's a really good question. I mean, largely in the past, we've always looked at, what's your 3 to 5 year plan? If you remember being in school and somebody would say, where do you want to be in 10 years' time? I
Yeah.
didn't know then. And businesses have always had a relatively good insight with the same variables that they're looking at, and they
Mm.
kind of know what they're looking to achieve. Nobody anticipated a pandemic
No.
impacting their business. Nobody anticipated the challenges and the length of time it would take for Brexit, for example,
Mm.
to take its course. And we're still only seeing what that means. So I think really it all comes down to the biggest challenge has been decision making.
Yeah.
Where do we place our bets? Do we continue to hire? Do we reduce our costs?
Mm.
Uh, you know, do we prevent the plans that we had in place for maybe growing into different regions, into different markets? Um, and a big thing that people have been looking for, they realize they need more data insights. So,
Okay.
the world has been looking at big data and what kind of
Mm.
data we've needed for a long time. I'm personally a big believer in data, but I'm also a big believer in that you can get data to tell you what you want it to tell you. So we
Yeah.
have to be very strategic and quite open to change around the data that we're analyzing
Mm.
and how we're using that data.
Mm.
Um, and then lastly, it's been a challenge for myself, let alone for the businesses I've been
Yeah.
speaking with. But, you know, trying to see 6 steps ahead, be that chess player in the
Mm.
game that you're playing and try to understand um, whether it's talent progression, talent acquisition, the success of your service or product offerings. How do we ensure that we're anticipating every obstacle that might come up against us in the most obstacle riddled time we've ever lived in?
That's right. Yeah, yeah, and with no real precedent, that's the thing, isn't it? No one's really known that this is going to happen, and it has happened. And a lot of the conversations I've had, and we've been doing this now since April, is about businesses adapting and adapting quickly. And I'm assuming that you've had lots of those conversations where companies have called up and said, right, I need to adapt. How can you help me? you know
Yeah.
um how do you deal with that? How does technology help people to adapt so quickly?
So it's kind of interesting. I mean, if I take it from a Salesforce perspective and
Sure. Yeah.
how we've dealt with it, because we are a large company, right? We now have 54,000 employees.
Mm.
It's pretty large. I have to give kudos to all of my fellow leaders and the
Mm.
company as a whole for keeping us connected, but it is quite large and it is a challenge. Um, I think what we're seeing from customers is that they're struggling to identify how to stay connected in order to make some of those
Mm.
decisions around technology, and how do they truly evaluate what they need and what they could be doing. So when it comes to adapting, as you mentioned before, and I suppose I, you know how technology could be
Mm.
supporting those people, it's really kind of come down to collaboration and analytics. So I mentioned data insights before, but the collaboration piece is kind of an interesting one. I don't know about you, but I've certainly felt quite exhausted with the sheer volume of channels, the different channels that we've had. People calling us, and you might have Slack like we have now. You
Yeah.
might have things like GChat. There's Zoom. There's Google Meet, there's all the different tools.
Mhm.
Everybody's using a different tool, and actually trying to identify social cues from people. Like technology helps, but if you don't create a path and a plan for how you're going to use that technology, people do get burned out. So
I think
if you're not
sometimes as
looking,
well, you get so many, there's so many different options as well, isn't it? I would assume that sometimes what you're saying, like you said, like we're not trying to sell you everything, we're trying to help you. So, with all these huge pieces of software, I've read a stat that every single piece of software, people only really use about 20% of the software. And I think that's true, isn't it? You don't use everything, do you? So I'm assuming
absolutely.
some of the times what you're trying to do is push people down the path that matches, and not trying to kind of blow up their minds with all the different toys that you could play with.
You're spot on. I mean, that's one of the recommendations that we've given long before COVID, that,
Mm.
identify who the users are and what they need. And the chances are actually that not everybody in your organization, and that includes small companies, not everybody needs to have exactly the same tools. In fact, that could be quite overwhelming. But if
Mm.
you are educated on what are the tools that are going to help you do your job, and then you give feedback on whether those tools are supporting you or not, that is going to give you a much more sustainable growth around the technology that you're investing in.
Yeah.
And look, none of us could have done this without technology. If
Yeah.
this had happened 20 years ago, would we have been set up
No.
for companies to sustain themselves?
There
Absolutely
would be
not.
no GCS, there would be no IT recruitment going on.
There
I
you
didn't have
go.
my fax machine or anything like that. That wouldn't be working. So no, it's been a real. We've used Teams a lot. So
Yeah.
from nothing to using Teams, and then everything's done on Teams now. And I'm
Mhm.
sure, like, if you're a Salesforce user linking in with that, like you said, and it's amazing, really. Like, you've never seen this piece of software before, and now all of us are kind of super users.
Yeah.
It's an amazing progress, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. We were so used to traveling in the past. And actually, there's some really fantastic technology companies out there that are competitors to us. Sometimes they work alongside us in the ecosystem, for our customers. But actually, we've we've adapted quite quickly from traveling to see our customers face to face, which
Yeah,
we always truly believed was the best way to know and understand how we
understand
can
them. Yeah,
support our customers. Um, to actually identifying how do we use different tools. So we do, you can see I have a whiteboard in the background here.
good.
I
Well,
use
you've got the
that.
brand up there. It's great.
There you go. I use it for myself. Sometimes it's inspirational, sometimes it's operational, but it's mostly it's actually mostly online whiteboarding that we're using. We're
Yeah,
encouraging customers to step outside of their comfort zone bit by bit. We don't want to inundate people too much, but to use collaborative tools and to still continue that strategic
yeah,
digital transformation planning that they would have done in person in the office
mm,
with us.
yeah. Okay, brilliant. Well, and you obviously talked about, like, this kind of brings me to the next question about pitches and solutions. You went to whiteboarding. What are your key tips? Because there'll be people here who are in sales engineering, there are in sales.
Yeah.
What are your key tips with regards to making sure you deliver a good solution or a good pitch?
So, first of all, I would say make sure that you don't have too many people on a call. We're all remote, right? I think we're pretty much all doing our part to
Mhm.
do all of these pitches from home. So number one would be making sure that there's the right number of people on the call.
Mm.
One of the ways that we've been changing our workshops is actually deciding who needs to be there at what time. So putting a little bit of time aside to schedule and plan the agenda so you get the maximum out of the people without inundating them and still giving them a voice.
So they're not
It's
sat there
easier.
for 3 hours waiting for their bit at the end.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also, if there's a very large group of people, you know, s- if you were in person in a room, you might be more likely to speak up. But with a large number of people on a call, how often do people speak up and make their voice heard? And that's really important because I think, as we all know, regardless of what you're selling or what service you have or what kind of business you're in, you need to hear from people, and
Yeah.
that would be the major part. Secondly, provide them with the tools that they need, and again, not too many tools, but one single source of truth for whatever collaboration is happening. We use one of our own tools, Quip,
Yeah.
which is a great way of capturing our notes. It's great because it gives contextual information to everything that we're working on. But we also use tools like Google Jamboard,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
doing a lot of our strategic workshopping with our customers and internally.
Yeah. And I think this is the whole thing, isn't it? And once you've worked out how to do this, you mentioned about traveling. Will you go back? Do you think? Will you go back to, in this wonderful world? We always say it, like when we're all okay, when things are normal again. Do you think you'll go back to how it was?
So I think we will, but I think we will do it very differently. I was always quite a fan, actually, of doing things
Yeah.
remotely. I previously managed a team that was based in London. I've also been an individual contributor who traveled to London a lot and all over the UK, actually, because we serve the UK market. But because we work in small business, my team works in small business. Um, we're certainly seeing the value and the benefits of being able to speak to more customers and help more customers
Yeah,
in a
that's right.
day than you would if you were traveling. So that's one benefit that we get. And secondly, we get to really delineate between where our time is best spent. So we've taken a step back and really started to you know do what we're preaching and take a look at the data and insights and see, are there certain customers that need more support? Is there a particular area of innovation that is really insightful for the times we're living in that we can do remotely? And I don't think that's actually going to change all that much.
No, I think it's given us change in the way we work. I mean,
Yeah.
for instance, these types of podcasts, and we never used to do anything like this now, but it's a great way of interacting with your community, that we would never have thought about before. And when things go back to normal, is definitely not something we're going to switch off straight away. So yeah, it's great to have these conversations and be in the position that you can have them. And then we talk for yourself about being a leader. You've always got a team and you've got collaborative teams that you work with. What do you think the kind of, how is it affecting how you're working with your team as a leader?
Good question. I mean, I'm not going to lie and say that it's been easy. It has been tough, and the thing is, everybody has different challenges that arise in normal times, and they don't pause just because we're in the middle of a pandemic as well. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
that's not how life and luck works out. So I'll be honest, it's given me a little bit of anxiety at times. You don't have the natural organic sense check that you would have in the office. I get a real buzz out of just being around my colleagues in the office and
Yeah.
just hearing the excitement and the laughter and a bit of news that might be coming up or just having a little chat. So that is something that's missing. And it's great. My husband is great for chatting with as well. Don't get
Yeah,
me
that's
wrong.
right.
He's wonderful to have lunch with. But I will say one of the things that I'm quite happy to have had throughout this as a leader is the time and space to pause and think about, what am I not seeing? What am I not hearing? Um, it becomes very prevalent that you have to actually reach out to hear things, to get news, to understand how
Yeah.
my team is feeling, how are they engaging, are they happy? Maybe their performance looks great to me, but maybe they're not particularly happy. So it's given me the time and space to really plan my own calendar and make the time um to look after them and understand how I can support them. I mean, we've still had people getting promoted and progressing
Yeah,
their
that's right.
careers throughout this time, which has been great. Um, and then it also has given me more time to set aside the space to be a bit more strategic.
Mm. And this really kind of links into leadership. And Norah, I think you'll be fine with me saying you're very visible on LinkedIn, on social media, and Salesforce are also very visible on LinkedIn and social media. So I've got a couple of questions there. Is that something you've increased in the last 12 months? Would you say you've kind of done more social media stuff? If you're listening, go to Norah. She's posted some great stuff and great stuff about the business, great stuff about diversity, which we'll come on to. But is that something you've proactively increased?
That's a good question, because immediately when you say that, I think of I can envisage a graph of how my interaction with social media has gone throughout the last 12 months.
Yeah.
I think I overdid it in the beginning, more in my personal life, just trying to reach out and connect with people. I think we
Mm,
all had Zoom quizzes that we were doing, and then posting things on all our social channels to make it
yeah.
seem like everything was fine. Look, this is
Yeah.
all fun. This will only last a couple of months.
There's
It'll be
love being there.
fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
And then you get burned out. So on my personal graph, there's a dip. There was quite a dip for a while throughout last year, where I couldn't even bring myself to engage. And I
Mm,
would happily listen, and learn. And again,
mm,
that's something I learned to do, is step back and listen
mm,
and learn. Um, and now in recent times, and again, everybody's going to be quite different. I've definitely seen that increase for myself. Everything I've been learning has built up different areas that I'm really becoming quite passionate about. You mentioned diversity. That's
yeah.
something that I'm becoming more and more passionate about, because I'm
Mm,
seeing it in a very different light right now.
mm,
I'm also really inspired by things that companies have been doing. I mean, we've seen in the past with things like Airbnb that these little sub industries come out of these brand new innovations. And actually, that's happening all over the world right now. You've
yeah.
small businesses creating food boxes that I can tell you I've certainly lived off for, for quite a while now, or,
Yeah.
little local business. Whether it's crafts or gifting or something, it's really changed how we see how businesses work, but also how people
Mm,
are
yeah.
sustaining themselves right now. So yes, I
Yeah.
am engaging a lot more at the
No,
moment
that's
in
it's
social.
really good, and then that links into me about Salesforce, because I'm fascinated by the company, because it's a company. When did it start? Because in the scheme of things, it's relatively recent, isn't it?
It's so 1999. I mean, it's
Okay, which I guess is
yeah,
relatively recent, isn't it? So
it is relatively
yeah,
recent, I suppose, in terms of the players that we
yeah.
are benchmarked against in the market.
Oracle, SAP, that sort of thing. So yeah,
Exactly, yeah. But we do have, I mean, we have sustained a bit of a public image and an internal feeling of that startup culture,
yeah,
and
that's right. Yeah,
and retaining that sort of fun and innovation. Something that we're very proud of. But I think we're all very honest that it's a difficult thing for a 21, 22-year-old company to sustain, things like 30% year-on-year growth, or at this stage in our lifetime as a company.
and this always fascinates me, because I believe that the CEO and leader is still the same guy that started it.
It sure
His
is,
name's
yes.
gone out of my
Mark
head.
Benioff, yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Um, is he still involved? As a
Very
leader?
much so.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
much so. So
Mm,
Mark Benioff and Parker Harris started
mm.
out just like many is a tale in Silicon Valley. It
Yeah, and
started out in an
garage.
apartment,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
yeah, exactly, and just getting things kicked off. Mark had come from Oracle, and actually a year after he set up the company, some other former Oracle staff based in Ireland decided to set up the EMEA hub. They set
Okay.
aside
Yeah.
their salaries and took a big risk and set it up in Ireland to begin that. And as you know, we now have bases all over Europe, and it's grown massively. But Mark Benioff is still very much involved, but in a way that he has done just the right delegation, I think, to a lot of his leadership. There's been a lot of
Mm.
change, and he's always trying new things with his leadership teams, listening to the pulse. We do very regular employee surveys to understand how the people on the ground are working, and it helps keep a much flatter organization than one would expect for a 54,000 person company.
And I think that's really interesting, because when basically what we're doing Leader Series for is to find out stories from great leaders. And obviously, there's not necessarily a hierarchy. Sometimes you get lucky, but it's great to hear stories about those, let's call them super leaders, who have built a
Yeah.
54,000 person company that's multi-billion turnover, because and it's good to hear that they're still involved in the business and still passionate, and still with their finger on the pulse.
Absolutely. And I think, just to be, I suppose, from my own personal perspective, I really do feel that um, it's important for any leader, whether you're Mark Benioff or, you know, myself, a frontline
Yeah.
manager for a team of 10 people, that it's important to be very open about where you're trying something, and if you don't succeed, you're not reprimanded for failing at
That's
it,
right.
that you continue to try, that you share the power amongst everybody. Everybody has a voice and decision making capabilities in the
Yeah.
process. I feel that that virtue has been what has sustained a lot of the growth that we have. We're not perfect, you know, that's a big part of it. I think we're very good at saying that. People will call out Salesforce for being great around diversity and for innovation and all these different things, but ultimately you can't set yourself as a benchmark. You have to continue to look at, well, what are we not doing well, and what could we do a little bit better?
Yeah, what could you improve, and
Exactly.
if you're fast growing, and then we come to the subject, as it were, of diversity, which I know is something that you're really passionate about, and I believe Salesforce is also really passionate about. I think you see the awards that you've won around the LGBT community and different things. I've noticed that on your social media now. What are the key insights that you think you've got around that in the last 12 months, in terms of, you know, as you become more interested in this, you know, that you think might be that are really kind of taking you forward this year?
Yeah. I can really only speak for myself on this, but one of the things that I'm really learning is that, you know, we have to be very careful about not making diversity something that we get a pat on the back for. You know, that's number one. Diversity is not a tick the box exercise. It's not just about representation. You know, diversity and inclusion are a well-known duo for a reason, and inclusion is really the area that I'm becoming more and more interested in, because diversity, I think, as we all know, is it's not about your gender, your sexual orientation, your race, your background. Those are things that can provide you with some diversity, but diversity is about thought. It's your diversity of thought, and that's what I'm looking for. I want people to argue with me in my team meetings. I want them to tell me I'm wrong. I want to learn from them, and I hope we can all learn from one another. It may mean those meetings take a bit longer, but the outcomes are a lot better. And
That's
then
right.
around the areas of inclusion, I think we need to be very careful not to just say that, you know, to provide ourselves with measures like we will have female representation on every hiring panel, we will have you know, 50% female leadership, or, you know, things like that. With that sort of qualitative or quantitative measure, you miss out on the qualitative elements, or even you make assumptions on what inclusion really means. I've recognized that there's the potential for exclusion based on behavior, language, status quo, you know, the culture that exists, or there's even self-exclusion that happens from individuals that could be labeled as diverse because they don't feel they fit the mold, or they've had certain feedback. And at the end of the day, diversity should never be your goal if you're not willing to change the culture.
Yeah, and it's got to be a natural progression in the culture, hasn't it? It's got to be
Absolutely.
something that, well, of course, you know, it's not. Someone said to me, I think it's our chairman, said that the world has turned now, whereas before a CEO, for instance, could be apolitical, and it's almost better to be apolitical, like I don't have a position on this.
Yeah.
Whereas now, the way it should be is that you do have a position on this, and you drive it, and you feel that it's important, but at the same time, it just doesn't work if it's not naturally you, does it? You know, you've got to do it in your own natural style because you believe in it.
Absolutely. And you make a good point about, you know, where we are in history. And I think we all do it. We've all been binging Netflix and, you know, seeing shows from 20 years ago, and you think,
I've
oh,
finished
that would
Netflix,
never play.
Nora. It's done.
Oh, you
I've
got,
got nothing more. I've come
wow.
to the end of it. So yeah.
Is there a badge? Is it like, you know,
That'd be good,
solitaire
wouldn't it? I
where
think that they should actually do that, shouldn't they? When they said, like, you have now finished Netflix. Congratulations. You know?
like solitaire with all the cards going flying.
That's right.
But
Yeah.
no, I mean, like we've seen that we've definitely all come a long way, but
Mm,
there's still a lot that we need to do. And I think we're currently living in a culture, and actually you mentioned social media. I
mm,
think we've all seen on things like Instagram and TikTok and all that kind of thing that
yeah.
call out culture is a big thing. And that can be good, or it can actually be create a greater binary between people, you know, that
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
need to avoid. And we're learning. I've had these discussions within my team, you know, what are the appropriate times to call out and what are the appropriate times to call in.
Mm,
So if you overhear somebody saying something that whether they intended to or not, it was inappropriate, you know,
mm,
that you maybe take them aside, have a discussion with them separately, not to
mm,
embarrass and to encourage their growth. And if they won't do that, if they won't, you know, commit to some of that growth, that
mm.
perhaps the next step is call out, but to be quite careful about how we do it and to encourage that growth across everyone.
Yeah. And my last question, really, for me, and this is something that's linked to a conversation we had the last leader series with a guy called Ash in 1010. We talked now about your background being politics and photography, right? So
Yeah.
what were you in politics? Is it kind of campaign? I haven't actually looked on LinkedIn to see what you did
No,
before.
that's
What
okay.
you did before, Nora?
I'll explain.
You weren't an MP, were you? That would be really
Oh
exciting.
no, I'm afraid not. So as you mentioned, I'm based in Ireland, right? And when I graduated into a recession, and
Yep.
with all my naivety when I started out in university, I decided to do film studies and modern Irish language because I had done all my education through the Irish language here in Ireland. Turns out there were no jobs at all, let alone jobs in a very niche field like film studies and Irish. So
Irish
uh,
film studies, that you're
there
getting
you
quite
go.
niche, right?
Very, very niche indeed. But regardless, I was lucky to have a bit of a hobby of photography and was encouraged by some friends of mine. A lot of my friends work in theatre and film and television, wonderfully successful, and they were great for pushing me to say, hey, you know what, why don't you start doing headshots for people? And
Okay.
that ended up giving me a freelance career for a couple of years as a photographer, which actually was an amazing way of sustaining myself. But through that, surprisingly, I ended up being asked to do photographs for a senatorial candidate in
Okay.
Ireland. So a gentleman named Sean Barrett, and
Okay.
through him, I ended up staying with him to become his campaign manager, then his
Oh, wow.
political assistant once he got elected, and I stayed with him for a while. And you know what? It's one of the things I would encourage, not just to leaders, but to individuals to recognize that you will have different stages in your career, and it's okay to go down different paths and take opportunities as they arise, because that opportunity enabled me to do a master's in creative digital media.
Sure.
Um, and then I started in Salesforce. I took a big leap of faith when they called me up to be an intern creating
Mm,
videos. I was only meant to stay for 3 months, but again, just being curious and getting to know people in the organization, I found that despite not having a technical background, solution engineering was really, really interesting. And the Salesforce platform is a really, really easy platform to
yeah.
get to
Yeah.
know. It's all point and click. I'm not going to
Mm,
pretend that I'm some wonderfully technical person here. It's just a really great tool to get your hands on and do some
mm,
really creative things with. So through that led me into my career and actually gave me a really good opportunity to probably develop better relationships with my prospects, because my customers had come from, you know,
yeah,
very
background.
diverse backgrounds, and that's
Mm.
why diverse hiring should include non-technical backgrounds, just like Ash was mentioning.
No, I really agree with that, and I think it's something that as recruiters, it's something we have to push. You know, it's something that we have to say. Look outside the job spec. I think, I mean, we've talked some diversity of job specs. Look outside the job spec, and what do you actually really need here, and what can you train, and what can you develop, as opposed to having particularly in IT, the
Yes.
perfect person. You know, and so I mean, I think there's many benefits out of that. You know, you probably get someone, if you're thinking about the bottom line, for less money. You'll probably get someone from a completely different type of culture, like you said, thought-based, that has a very new viewpoint on things, but also it just makes hiring easier. You've got a wider palette to take from, haven't you?
Absolutely. And for anybody saying, oh, but there are no women in technology, well, first of all, that's untrue. And second of all, the behaviors that everybody has around how they approach a job spec is different. And that's why we moved to a competency-based job spec, as I mentioned to some of your colleagues on the previous webinar. We did move to competency based, and it was a good exercise to try and identify, well, what are the competencies I'm looking for when I go into a hiring panel and I'm meeting with different candidates. I'm happy to say, okay, your presentation skills might not be great, but are you coachable? Have you demonstrated something else that doesn't exist within our team that we could really benefit from? We're looking to create a blend within our teams, and also for when we're looking to progress those individuals from teams, we need to identify who's going to fill the gap of the blend that they've brought. So it's a good way of looking at like you say, widening the pool and challenging your own perceptions on how we do our job. It's not easy. I think for any hiring managers out there, you might have been told you only have budget within this short space of time. You have to do it fast. There's all these other variables that come into it. But if you're prepared for that with something like a competency-based model, you're engaging on social media, you'll have a better opportunity.
To maybe put the work in afterwards, because like you said, if the person's coachable, you're going to need to coach them, right? You're going to need to help them to learn different areas. So it's a more the onboarding becomes more important.
There you
as
go.
Opposed to the interviewing,
Absolutely. I hired 7 people last year, and many of which started during the pandemic remotely. I haven't met them in person yet. So even though we've developed great relationships together, they are fantastic members of my team. But it was extra effort. I will say that was quite a lot of effort to really train in a lot of new people. 50% of my team was brand new and didn't necessarily come from a tech background.
Well, and that's good to hear. And I think from our side, that's one of the reasons why we really wanted to kind of get you involved, Norah, is because I think the way that Salesforce and yourself and kind of changing the image, as it were, of IT, I think that's great for everyone kind of going forward, and that's definitely what we need in order to, IT is so important, and it's really important to have different images and different kind of viewpoints that push it forward. So I'm really pleased to have had this conversation, Norah. It's been great to speak to you.
Thank you so much.
I hope you just keep that up all the time. On the leader series on the thing. Just so if you're listening, Norah's got GCS leaders series and written on her whiteboard. So if you could just keep that up for your next few clients that you're speaking to and talk to them about it, then that would be really nice. Great to speak to you today. Thank you very much, Norah, and we look forward to speaking soon.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you to all your team.